So again, welcome the two of you. The first, I want to start with Philip. I want you to maybe introduce yourself a little bit. Oh, but before that, I should just give a little bit of a brief bio of the two of you. So I'll start with Philip. He's a historian, translator, and journalist. He teaches at the Jesuit University Ignatianum in Krakow, Poland, and has written for First Things, The Catholic World Report, and many others. And he has a great connection with the Roca Press. He's translated two great works. One is Love and Social Justice, Reflections on Society, and it collects a lot of the writings of Blessed Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski, who was the great primate of Poland for many years. And he translated this work. It's a 600-page work, and I'm definitely grateful for him for translating that. So when you introduce yourself kind of more formally, you can mention that book, which I think the readers would, or the viewers would be great to learn about. And also he translated this wonderful book by Vladislav Raymond, who was at one time, he won a Nobel Prize in Literature for another work of his called The Peasants. So first thing, maybe you can kind of introduce yourself in your own words, Philip, and just kind of explain you've been doing, your background, and maybe we can go from there.
Sure. Well, I was born in Poland. I was 4 years old when I moved to the United States, where I grew up and spent the majority of my life. So I'm a dual U.S. and Polish citizen, although right now I'm living in Kraków, Poland. Although as we speak right now, I'm in South Dakota, which is where I grew up. So that's my life story, I suppose. I recently submitted my doctoral dissertation in history, and next month in March I will have my doctoral exam. And if all goes well, and the reviewers of my dissertation will will give positive reviews to my dissertation, and my defense should happen in the spring. And I teach, as you mentioned, at the Jesuit University Ignatianum in Kraków, where I teach English. So I teach courses related to language, culture, American society. I teach a course called Academic Reading and Writing. I teach a course on film, so I teach different things.
Oh, wow. Okay. You touched on film. That's something I want to talk about later on in this conversation, which I think is of relevance to Catholics. But I'm fascinated that you have this deep connection with Poland. I know both of you do. How did that come about? Because I don't think it's a given that someone will have such a deep connection with their ethnic background and the history of where they're from. What made you first become so interested in your own history, and why you even chose history as a profession?
Well, as far as why I chose history, I guess everyone's mind is a little different. Every person's different. Everybody's good at different things, and everyone is bad at different things. Everyone likes different things. So, for example, when I was in school, I didn't like science. I thought science was really boring.
Yeah.
The process by which plants turn sunlight into sugar, I don't find that particularly fascinating. With all due respect to scientists, I'm just saying that it didn't ring my bell. Um, but history, I just always, for some reason, really liked. I always found history to be fascinating. I don't know why. I had a very good history teacher in high school. His name's Mr. Gordon. He's retired now, and I think I formed a good connection with him, and he inspired me to become interested in history. Also, history was a topic that was brought up in the family home a lot. Talked a lot about my family's traumatic World War II experiences.
Yes.
A lot. As far as Polish history and culture, well, so my parents, of course, they do speak English, but they always insisted that we speak Polish at home. And I spent many summers growing up in Poland, and I just became really interested in Polish history and culture probably as a teenager. And I think the reason for that is the way European history in the United States, and I'd say probably Western Europe as well, is taught, is that European history is the history of France, England, Germany, and Italy, and maybe Spain. And yet Poland is a country that was very large in its past. Even today, it's not a small country by European standards. And it's a country that's made very important contributions to history and science and culture. But yet these contributions oftentimes are overlooked,
I,
and so that's what makes it made it interesting because there's just it's just a gold mine that's been untapped, and yet I think for many Americans, Western Europeans, Polish history and culture can be attractive.
I that brings up a point. For example, this book, while it's not his maybe greatest work, I think it's wasn't it this his first novel, was it? If I'm not
It's not
mistaken.
a novel, as you know. It's a work of nonfiction, but yes, it's his first book. His first book.
Yes. And it was never translated into English until I think you approached me. I forget how we came into contact. Actually, I do know. It had to do with this book, and then you mentioned translating this book. But yeah, I found it fascinating that this book was never translated into English. I find that with a lot of other works in French and Italian, they're just unless there's some intrepid soul to get the ball rolling, they're never going to be translated into English, even though I think they have something of worth to give to the English speaking kind of world. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I just quickly, I think you made a some really fascinating points about just wanting to know one's history. I think a lot of us can forget about our own history. For example, I'm Greek, and it's taken me a long time to appreciate my Greek culture. It's past, and still I'm still learning. But you don't want to kind of forget about your history, and just kind of have be kind of a hollow person in some ways if you don't know your history or your ethnic background. So yeah, I found that. Thank you for sharing that. The first book you translated with us, remarkable book. Personally, I have a fascination with Catholic social teaching, which connects both of you actually. But this book, I remember how I came into contact with you. I was looking for a translator. Somehow I came into contact with the original Polish book, which I couldn't read, obviously, but I knew it was of importance. And I got in contact with you, and you agreed to translate this massive work. Why do you think it's important to have Blessed Wyszynski's works in English? I mean, I know some works have already been published in English, but nothing of this size, if I'm not mistaken. Why should someone read that book in your opinion?
Maybe I could answer that by giving a brief biographical sketch of Cardinal Wyszynski. So he was born in 1901 when Poland was partitioned between Russia, Prussia, or Germany by that point, and Austria. Poland did not exist on the map, but it existed in its people's hearts. And Polish independence was restored in 1918 with the end of World War One. Cardinal Wyszynski was someone who, basically, since he was born in 1901, he was a direct witness to Polish history and to history more broadly the some of the biggest events and ideas and ideologies of the 20th century. So in the 1930s, he was a priest in the city of Włocławek, which was an industrial city that had a major cellulose plant that employed many factory workers, and the factory workers did not necessarily receive the best treatment, and the future cardinal uh, gave them lectures on Catholic social teaching and defended their rights. He demanded that they be given lunch breaks or that they be given soap, um, and other things. During the Second World War, when Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland, the almost half of the priests in the in the diocese of Włocławek, where Wyszynski was a priest, were murdered, mostly in the Dachau concentration camp. And so he directly witnessed the neo-pagan Nazi ideology, and he most likely wrote this book when he was hiding from the Gestapo during World War II. And from 1948 until his death in 1981, Wyszynski was the primate of Poland. At this time, Poland was, of course, a communist state, and as Joseph Stalin famously said, bringing communism to Poland is like saddling a cow. And one of the reasons for that is that Cardinal Wyszynski helped to preserve the Polish people's Catholic faith. This book deals with some of the biggest ideologies of the 20th century: capitalism, racism slash Nazism, and communism, which, you know, we're in the 21st century now, but I think that these ideologies are still, I would say, alive in many ways. I'm a millennial. I grew up in the. I remember I went to college in the late 2000s, and I remember the Great Recession, and that was a time when I think many people in my generation began to question laissez-faire capitalism. With regards to communism, well, of course, the Soviet Union fell. The People's Republic of China is its official ideology is communism, but it's adopted a free market ideology. But yet, even today, we have all these Marxist ideologies in the West that, just like Marxism in the 19th century, appeared as a reaction to real injustices that were happening to the workers, especially in England, where Karl Marx lived. Similarly, today, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, it arose in response to racism, to that, the killing of George Floyd, for example, shows that racism is still alive in the United States, and yet there are many issues with critical race theory and BLM, and that they adopt a Marxist worldview. They see basically whites as white society as intrinsically evil, and they seem to have transferred the concept of Marxist class warfare into racial categories. So here we have someone who directly witnessed the worst of three major ideologies of the 20th century: capitalism, Marxism, and fascism, Nazism. And yet he gives a response from Catholic social teaching. So for Wyszynski, these were not abstract concepts, and he was
Right.
also someone who was uncompromising. So that's why I think he's worth reading. And this book was banned under communism, which
All right. Yes.
shows
Uh,
why it was
Now
dangerous.
I have a section on our website dedicated just to Catholic social teaching, and I think, as someone said, I don't know who said it, but Catholic social teaching is the church's best kept secret. And I think more people need to know about the church's robust teaching on society, on economics, the worker, labor, capital. Um, this book it's just incredible. I want more people to read it. And I hope, hopefully this will kind of give more attention to it. Thank you. First of all, thank you for translating the book. It was a
Sure.
great labor of love. We did get a grant from the Polish Institute, which definitely helped with the
Yeah, the Book
translation.
Institute.
The Polish Book Institute. So that was very helpful. In particular, and I think both of you can answer this. What do you think Poland in general? It's a broad question, sure, but what do you think Poland can give to the kind of the broader Catholic world? A love, a reading of Polish history or literature, culture. How could it help the broader Catholic world? Just maybe I don't know, galvanize them or help them along in their Christian life, if anything. And anyone can answer that. Um, I don't know, maybe Gratian, and we'll get a kind of a more of an introduction in a bit to your work.
Yeah, so the question is specifically how can involvement with Polish culture specifically
or
galvanize?
or history. Why should someone maybe be interested in Poland and its history? And even why has it been important for you? I know you have a deep connection with Poland. Um, why has it been so important for you? And maybe you can kind of go off on that.
Oh, sure. Like you said, I mean, if you want to do, you can read the introduction. I'll do that after that, I guess. Maybe that would be a better idea, like just to kind of give people an idea where I'm coming from. Because like,
Yeah, that's a great idea. So let me introduce Gratian. He's the author of three novels for Aroka Press, and one is the Thermonuclear Mirth. It's this big book. It's a 900-page novel. Seraphim and the Dust Plague, and another one, and the Hippo Lectures, a book of essays. And he's also written a book on Civil War history, Catholic Confederates, the holder of a PhD in history, teaches at universities in the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest, and is the director of intellectual formation at Vandal Catholic in Moscow, Idaho. I found this interesting. He played baseball in college, 2 seasons professionally in Europe in the Czech and Belgian Premier Leagues, and between 2011 and 2013, competed for the Polish national team. He's fluent in English, Polish, and French, some ability in Italian, Russian, and Spanish. That's a broad background. Your love for Poland, first of all.
so exactly. And I think that like, yeah, thank you for that. I think that that's like certainly intrinsic to answering the question in the first place, that my particular interest just comes from my family history. My father is an American, but last name Kraszewski, obviously Polish. Going back a couple of generations, my mother was born in Poland. They met in Poland in the 1980s, actually at university in Krakow. So I talk about a small world, especially related to us,
Yeah.
here. But in a very, very similar situation, I grew up almost exclusively in the United States. I went to first grade in Poland, but otherwise was born in America, grew up here. Our language at home was always Polish. So I have a younger brother, 4 years younger than I am. We would always speak a Polish at home, even more than predominantly, almost kind of exclusively, and that was fun. It was a way of kind of keeping the culture going forward. So from the earliest days, I think on a personal sense, Polish culture meant a lot to me through the language. I think that's always true.
It is, yes.
Yeah, people always say, I connected with my Cuban roots when I learned Spanish, or I came to appreciate Brazil more when I learned Portuguese, etc. So linguistically, and then again, kind of uniting the threads of three of us here. I'm a cradle Catholic all my life, so Poland and Catholicism in a certain way fit like hand in glove. It got, on a more profound level, deeper level for me, like you said, when I played for the Polish national team the first time in 2011, I had to get my citizenship for that. I had to become a dual citizen because up to that point, I just had American citizenship. So getting to go over and do that was, huge blessing, super, super fun, and just kind of ingratiated me into just that, just the idea of like of representing Poland, being part of that culture. When I was in graduate school, there was a kind of two roads diverged in the wood potentiality that I might try to go on and do a dissertation about John Paul II, specifically his first visit to Poland in 1979. I ended up going on a different track and getting my PhD in American history, but that, in a sense, will hopefully answer your question of like my connection to Poland. How does Poland matter for the larger world? I think that's more difficult, to answer. You look at like, the great Romantic poets, the 19th century, the idea of Poland in its stateless period after the three partitions until 1919, is kind of the crucified Christ of Poland. All right. But I mean, like, we're talking about nationalism and strong patriotic nationalistic feelings. France, America. I mean, in a certain sense, if you're part of that in group, that'll mean more to you. In terms of universal values, and I guess just by an accident of time and birth, I'm a huge partisan of John Paul II, like, that connection of not just as the Holy Father, but being Polish. And so I think he, in his person, even everything that Cardinal Wyszynski stands for, so, John Paul II equally, and even kind of on a larger scale, gave hope to the church, gave hope to the world. Look at like his, Centesimus Annus in 1991, right?
Mm.
Which in a certain sense brings up those arguments of Rerum Novarum and Quadragesimo Anno, and and he wrote Labor Exercens also in 1981.
Mhm.
So there's some kind of universal appeal, perhaps coming from his experience, as Philip talked about,
Sure. Right.
from the 1980s and seeing the worst of Nazism and communism. What does Poland have to offer the world today? You know, I honestly, I want to always answer every question, with perfect honesty. There's this guy in Poland now. And his last name I think is Bartoszek, Jakub Bartoszek. He's always on this other guy's. He has this geopolitical channel, Piotr Suchowicz. It's called Historia Realna. And this guy Bartoszek is a constant guest. He's a geopolitical kind of theorist, and he's talking about like in the world now, right, and hopefully not approaching a World War III, breaking out of the protectionism of America, having that umbrella over Poland. Poland's going to have to take more responsibility for its security, everything going on with Ukraine and Russia, be this kind of bulwark and reclaim its place, I think, as Philip perfectly mentioned, as a linchpin to European history, Central European history, not on the periphery, but very much the heart of Europe. So perhaps that, but in terms of lessons, I think that it's almost because of having that oppressive system, especially in the 1980s and martial law and the whole solidarity movement that arises in opposition to all that, that there you had your kind of strongest universal values coming out. Now it's like sadly in some ways, right? Poland has become or is trending as much secular as any other country, and I guess my hope would be that kind of she holds on to those Christian roots that were so obvious and prevalent in opposition to that alien communist system of the 50s, 60s, 70s, whatever.
Thank you. Thank you. Was well said. I noticed in your works, and I have two passages that I wanted to read from the Hippo lectures, but I've noticed that you're very much into the local kind of localism, or I don't know if that's the precise term you would use, but the subsidiarity, the local, your local region, that very much animates your works. And I wanted to, I'm interested in that idea. Why do you think knowing your local kind of community, your local region, uh, it was so important for your writing, or is so important for your writing?
Yeah, because like if you break down, the principles of Catholic social justice, you'll see lists with like seven total, but then there's always this kind of like general umbrella of, like you said, solidarity and subsidiarity. Solidarity, we're all made in the image likeness of God, love neighbor, these things that unify us. But subsidiarity, as you correctly mentioned, right? Whatever can be done on a local level should. And so, yeah, I think that it cuts out and avoids on both ends. If we're going to go back to like the great documents like Rerum Novarum, which is equally critical in some passages of the left and the right economically is more
Right.
distributive thought. Well, how are you going to be able to have even close to a type of distributism? You have to avoid the kind of bloated bureaucracy, whether it's on the right or the left, the bloated international capitalist type structures as much as the kind of uniparty communist state. So I think it helps economically, and I think it's just way healthier for communities too. Obviously, it's better if I can make my appeals that I want downtown fixed a certain way, or I want the pool to be open an extra month, or whatever, down to much more serious stuff and local education to people that I actually know, that I know from church, that I play golf with, whatever
Sure,
kind of
yeah.
stuff, as opposed to writing some letter to some guy 3,000 miles away, right? Like the kind of great parodies in the Soviet Union, the guy in like Vladivostok has to send a telegram across the Trans-Siberian Railway to someone in, Leningrad and get a response 6 months later. And say, it's bad. That's bad. Like, so the more local stuff you have, I think the more chance you have of right and just solutions. And then probably to a final point, the way farmers markets have exploded now, right? The farm to table local food. Well, I think you pay a little bit more, but it's better food, it's better for you. There's a communal aspect. So that probably extends to all kind of aspects of life. If you can do it locally, you're going to have a richer and more authentic experience.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I wanted to just read this short section from the Hippo lectures. Um, and yeah, I think you made some fascinating points. Above all, this book is about the Palouse. What's the Palouse
The
for?
police, yeah, no, the police. I live in Pullman, Washington, and the local school to us, the stone's throw away, is Washington State University. And then 7 miles across the board in Idaho is University of Idaho in Moscow. Those are the two great kind of sister cities of this region. So where it's located, it's about 5 hours east of Seattle, an hour and a half south of Spokane, 6 hours north of Boise. It's extreme eastern Washington and the northern section of Idaho. It's especially known for its kind of lentils farming land. A lot of people call it the Tuscany of America, that similar kind of rolling hills type area. So it's a general region.
um, Everyone knows what the Palouse is now. This is great. You'll hear enough in the coming pages about how Catholics must rediscover the principle of subsidiarity. That which can be done locally should be, as you mentioned before. Subsidiarity, pro co-op, the local community, the baker and barber next door, and like the Benedictine monks and their ora et labora philosophy, um, you're going to hear a whole lot about the Benedictines in this book. That's another thing that strikes me. You're very much into that, the wisdom of the monastics, which I think more people should realize, because the monastic life or the monastic thinking is definitely applicable for all of us, even if we're laymen. Um, there's nothing in life as sublime as prayer and work. If you and I'm just going to go on, it's all connected. If you want to achieve anything of value in this life and the next, you must pray and you must work. Seems simple enough, but I think that's profound. There are no substitutes for either. Love the real places. They reside in the real people that live there. For love of neighbor only has one command before it. And if in doing so others can do the same, love and work to perfect their own local region. What an archipelago of beauty might yet arise in these well-worn, tried, and tired United States, were they to be illuminated once more by true Christian values, colligated to, rather, catalyzed by subsidiarious focus. Um, yeah, that's I think that's very important. Our local community, what can be done at the local level should be done. That's very much a part of Catholic social teaching, very much. And the church has such a wisdom for the world that it just I get impassioned about it, and that's why I've dedicated a lot of our books to that topic, and both of you kind of have fit in that. I want to specifically mention your great work. I definitely think it's a great work. Thermonuclear Mirth has a grand narrative, novel. Um, would you consider it a Catholic novel? And maybe we can even define what does that even mean, a Catholic novel? Um, what exactly does that mean? Um, Maybe we can kind of first talk about who influenced you in writing this. It didn't just happen out of thin air. Someone influenced you, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. Yeah, I do think it's a Catholic novel, and my influences, absolutely number one, my father. He's a poet, translator, novelist, also just a overall like wonderful literary man. And I always say like I can go on and on and on to this kind of sycophantic like, oh, my dad's the best. I love him so much, but I do. It's true. He's awesome. For how amazing of a literary man he is, he's even a better father. So having that close to home. I always feel kind of like the blacksmith's son who like takes over the business. I'm sure a lot of whatever has been good. All glory to God and all thanks, to Him. Uh, Outside of that, you and I mentioned before in the interview that just you and I did about David Foster Wallace and Infinite Jest. Certainly, Walker Percy, I think, is the best Catholic novelist. I like Flannery O'Connor too. She seems to be the kind of the hippest one now, right? Everyone likes Flannery O'Connor, and they'll have her quotes in Catholic centers. I think Walker Percy's better, but I think she's good as well. Percy and Foster Wallace probably above all. Albert Camus is great. I love Albert Camus. He was just an absolute, militant atheist, right? And maybe militant's the wrong word, but kind of just like, hey, you just carpe diem because there's nothing else. And I like Camus a lot. His kind of like unapologetic, straight, terse style. I'd love to hear what Philip thinks about like what a Catholic novel is and all that. So I'll keep my response very, very brief. Uh,
Sure.
I'll say the reason I think my thing is a Catholic novel is because uh, it has it's faithful to Catholic orthodoxy. By that I mean that like the novel is very profane and vulgar at times. I think if you do a word check there's 360,000 words in Thermonuclear Mirth, I probably use the F word at least 1,000 times, probably, right? I mean, there's discussion of sex, there's tons of violence. Obviously, it's a book about thermonuclear war, but I think I'm very, very faithful to. Okay, well, there's violence and bad stuff in the Bible. Those authors, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, are trying to show you, you know, oh, happy fall that merited us this wonderful Redeemer, like where that arc goes, and Christ wins in the end. So my novel certainly has that kind of like happy ending, in the sense that the people faithful to Catholic values and Catholicism as that active ingredient of making it through this valley of tears gets you there in the end. But what I think, and again, I'll pass the torch to Philip and get his take. What I think makes a Catholic novel good is, yes, faithfulness to orthodoxy, but unapologetic showing of the reality of evil. I hate the kind
Sure.
of modern Protestant nonsense movies where it's like this guy was a really bad guy. He struggled with bad guy, bad thing, whatever, and then he read the Bible and now he's a really good guy.
Because it
Yeah,
doesn't seem true to human nature, right? I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Philip, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this kind of this definition of a Catholic novel. What makes a good Catholic novel? Because they're not all gonna be as successful in kind of maybe showing the reality of human nature and our need for a redemption. I don't know if you have any maybe thoughts on that, or maybe what works have appealed to you.
Okay. So I'm not a literary theorist, so maybe I can talk about some Catholic novels, uh,
Sure.
or religious novels more broadly that I liked and that had a big influence on me. With regards to Polish Nobel Prize winners, in 1905, the Nobel Prize for Literature went to Henryk Sienkiewicz, whose best known novel is a book that was very popular in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, but now, apart from Poland, it's somewhat faded into obscurity, and that's Quo Vadis. And it's a novel about Christians in the 60s AD in Nero's Rome. And the two main protagonists are lovers. One is a Christian girl, and the other and her lover is a Roman patrician, and he falls in love with this beautiful girl, and he also falls in love with Christianity because he sees what's right about Christianity. It's this novel that presents the persecuted, small but growing, poor Christian community of Rome with Roman society, which was very powerful and wealthy, but at the same time, it was very decadent. I think that's a novel that does a great job of showing what's right with Christianity. I think it would be great to use in catechesis. Apart from its moral Christian values, I it's also well written. It's also entertaining.
Mhm.
I'm not an expert on ancient Rome, but so I can't say how accurate it is. But it reads well. It's been adapted into many films. Another work from a Polish Nobel Prize winner is well, this is he wasn't a Catholic, he was a Jew. Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was born in Poland but later moved to the United States, and he wrote in Yiddish. He also won the Nobel Prize in literature, and he his favorite novel of mine, and probably his best known novel, is called The Magician of Lublin, and it's set in 19th century Russian controlled Poland, and the main protagonist is a famous magician, a famous illusionist, right? He's like the David Blaine or the David Copperfield of his time, and he has multiple lovers while being married, and he's half Jew, half Gentile, but he rejects both Christianity and Judaism, and he basically tries to live. Um, to reference Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, how tries to live as if God does not exist, but yet that all collapses on him. And so, even though Bashevis Singer was Jewish, I think that this theme of trying to escape God appealed to me as a Catholic very much. And since I mentioned Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, this isn't very original, but that's definitely also a great novel. In this case, also by a non-Catholic, by an Orthodox Christian, one who didn't like Catholics very much. One of my favorite Catholic novelists is Shusaku Endo, who is Japanese. And he's best known in the West for his book Silence, which was adapted into a film by Martin Scorsese. And I don't have anything against Silence; it's fine. But his other works that I liked more, especially his book Sachiko, which was just published in English a couple of years ago, although it was first published in Japanese in the 80s. And it's three interwoven narratives. One is the bombing of I can't remember if he was from Hiroshima or Nagasaki. I think Nagasaki. So one narrative is the atom bombing of one of those cities. Another is these once again Japanese lovers and this community of Japanese Christians during World War II who are being harassed by their fellow Japanese because they follow the religion of the enemy, or America and England. And also it's also Sachiko deals with the narrative of the famous Polish Franciscan friar Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who before the war was a missionary in Japan. And so Kolbe and Polish Franciscans are depicted both in Japan, but also he's depicted in Auschwitz. There are these imagined, I presume this is a fictional character, these imagined dialogues between Kolbe and this atheist school teacher. And the atheist school teacher keeps telling Father Kolbe, how if there's a good God, if there's a God who loves us, how can there be so much evil here? And Father Kolbe responds to him, if there's no good here, then we must create good here. And so eventually, as we all know, Father Kolbe volunteers to die in the place of a family man. And so this atheist school teacher is moved by this to do the only altruistic act he did during this camp. So I think experience. So I think that this is a novel that does a good job in answering the problem of theodicy and
Sure.
how can we believe in God when extreme
Yeah,
evil in this case happens.
yeah, that's the common objection to the existence
Right.
of
So
God,
that's
right?
another novel I greatly
Yeah.
recommend, Sachiko by Shusaku Endo. It's available in English. Strongly recommend it.
Brings up 2 points, and I would like Gracjan to maybe comment. Why should Catholics care about literature? Shouldn't they just read spiritual books or theology books? Why should they care about films? Shouldn't we just shun all of the films that's from Hollywood? Shouldn't we just shun all of that? Or should
No, yeah, no, because uh, Ernest Hemingway was driving through some part of Idaho, and Lloyd Arnold is a guy who wrote a book called High on Hemingway, just kind of, like a biographical kind of portrait, whatever. And Hemingway, he put in this book, this book about Hemingway, that Hemingway looked at him and said, "It's so beautiful here. I'm going to include this in For Whom the Bell Tolls," his book on the Spanish Civil War. And Arnold is like, "How is that possible? How can you include, Idaho in a book about Spain? It's so far away, it's so different, etc." And he said the freedom of fiction, and it's so true. Like you're there's no question. As someone who does academic writing and fiction writing, I love them both. They're both very, very valuable, but you're absolutely shackled with nonfiction in so many ways. You just
sure.
are, which might make it more difficult for some people. I would never want to imply like some pretentious, artists that, oh, fiction is the real writing and the nonfiction. Like they're both beautiful, they're both valuable, but there's no question that you're way more shackled in, bound in, hemmed in with nonfiction because you must rely on the sources, whatever it may be. And if there is a writer who has a lot of creativity and could put a better spin on something to help people evangelically, which seems to be the kind of implicit point of your question. How do we get this culture to
Sure.
like, come closer to Christ, to his
That's
church?
right.
But you can't do that by just writing another story about St. Faustina or etc. Much better, I think, to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet than just to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet and then watch a very interesting movie or read some interesting fiction book, then pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet and read a biography of St. Faustina. Like there's with spiritual reading and all that kind of stuff, like I would say Catholics should, read the Gospels daily and that kind of thing. But maybe
Yeah.
after you do that, you don't need the 50th like Catholic self-help book, where it's just a guy talking about here's these 9 steps or whatever. I think with fiction you can there's so much broader horizons. And often too, I think, you see someone who's influential towards you, it can go either way. Here's this guy, he was important in my life because I wanted to imitate him and be like him. All right. It could also be, here's this guy in my life, he was so influential because I realized to do the exact opposite of everything he did, right?
Yeah.
My favorite book in all of the Polish canon is this book called Insatiability by Witkacy, and it's written like in 1927, and it's this book. It's horrifying. It's absolutely terrible. There's this woman in there, Princess Ticonderoga, who's just an absolute kind of like sex maniac, horrible. Like it's just very awful. And you realize like, wow, like okay, this is the kind of post World War roaring 20s, we're done with God, that world died kind of world. And so a person can read that and kind of maybe be shocked in the faith. The best example of this, I think, is Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. And this book is horrifying, right? The devil, under the guise of this Professor Woland, comes to Moscow to do a magic show. And it turns out that he doesn't do any kind of magic really, except like counterfeit money and whatever. He just lets the people tear themselves to bits. Here are these people in 1920s, Soviet Union who are like, we're the new human, right? We have the revolution. We're done with the old
Mhm.
superstitions, and we don't believe in the devil anymore. We don't believe in God. The book actually starts with these two guys, these two writers at Patriarch Pons in Moscow, trying to write an article denying that Christ ever existed, which sadly is 100 years later, still same problem. Well, was Jesus really a historical figure? All this kind of, BS and nonsense. And so they're trying to. It's hilarious how Bulgakov does it. These two atheists are trying to say that Christ didn't exist, and, and they're telling this to the devil, who's like, "No, trust me, he exists." You know. And you read this book. It's a very horrifying book. It's a terrible book. Uh, maybe people have heard of it or read it. I don't want to spoil it for someone who's interested, but the main character, Margarita, who you don't meet till late in the book, sells her soul to the devil just to be with her adulterous lover, which is what it really comes down to. So you read that book, that's great spiritual reading. Do not sell your soul to the devil. Do not follow the devil. Believe in God. All wisdom, as the Bible says, is the beginning of all wisdom is fear of the Lord. Actually, fear God. Don't be like these Soviet guys who are like, God doesn't exist, the devil's a fairy tale. So that would be my whole, long-winded answer to why Catholics should read good fiction and stuff, because Master and Margarita, that is so fictional and fantastical. You have a talking cat, a guy gets turned into a hog. It's ridiculous. That freedom of fiction that Hemingway talked about can give you real spiritual helps versus just picking up the latest things. Some Catholic guy is like, here's 9 steps on being a nicer guy, kind of stuff.
Yeah, it just seems sanitized, right? It's
Yeah.
just so sanitized. It's so, in a sense, perfect. I mean, don't misunderstand me. That it can't really serve. I mean, I've known people. They've had a tough life, for whatever reason. They've made bad decisions. I mean, I couldn't even imagine giving them, not all. I mean, some of these books that are out now, which I I don't know how it would reach them, right?
It
So
kind of it kind of like mocks their struggle, right? These people have had a tough life, and what they really need to hear is some kind of like serious, deep wisdom, like how awful life is, but that there's a solution. For God so loved the world, he sent his only son, right?
I think, and I might be getting this wrong. I think Dorothy Day used to hate when people would say that she was a saint because then that kind of minimizes, that almost dismisses her. That it dismisses her. Oh, she's a saint, untouchable, can't relate to humans. You know what I mean? That's one reason I love like Dorothy Day, which I know is controversial amongst certain circles.
Yeah, and she had a very, very checkered past, right? So it's
Oh,
like,
oh, without a doubt. Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. But in some ways, it's more relatable, right? You can, even though you struggle, you've done maybe horrible things. The mercy of God is there. You can get out of it. You can find your way to sanctity, which is not sentimental, right? It's part of this real struggle. Uh, Maybe have like maybe 10 more minutes, but also I think what you find important, Grash, and I know you do too, Philip, is well, film. And first I would like to say, what I guess maybe it's probably related to literature. Would you Do you think film is important uh for Catholics to maybe watch, but obviously discerning, being prudent about it. But how could film, in what way does it differ than literature? Other than the obvious. Um, I don't know if any of you can maybe um, elaborate on how it can be important for a Catholic.
Well, I will say that the main reason why I watch film is to be entertained, and escapism, and there's nothing wrong with escapism.
Sure.
I think that, well, if you go to Florence, for example, or Rome, you will notice that almost all the great works of Renaissance arts are religious in nature, right? And so the church used to be a major patron of the arts. Now, since we're talking about the Renaissance, we all know that that wasn't exactly the moral high point of the papacy. But at the same time, at that time, the church understood that art can be a means of evangelizing.
Right.
This was also partly because most Christians were Europeans at the time, were illiterate, and so they had to be taught the gospel somehow visually. But I think that it's a great shame that today the church isn't a major, I guess, player in the world of film. I mentioned Saint Maximilian Kolbe earlier. Well, one of the most interesting what ifs of Catholic history would be what would have happened to Saint Maximilian if he hadn't died in Auschwitz, because he had some really ambitious plans. He considered making a film studio and producing Catholic films, and I'm really curious what
Oh,
they'd be
wow.
like. And I think earlier Gracjan was trying to be a little diplomatic, and he mentioned Protestant movies that aren't that great. I'm guessing he means probably God is Not Dead.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Come on. I
God is Not Dead is a very well-intentioned film, but a very bad film. Uh,
Right.
when I
There's no
watched it,
art in it, right? Yeah.
when I watched it at home in my apartment, I like had the volume down low, and I just kept checking just to make sure no one's watching me watch this, because it was so cringy. But I hope I'm not being mean to the filmmakers because they obviously had very noble intentions.
Sure, sure.
I wish that the church would make more films, and there'd be more Christian inspired films. But I mean, even in the 1990s, the Vatican, under John Paul II, created this list of 45 films that have aesthetic and moral merit, and some of these things are explicit. Some of these films are explicitly religious, but others, such as, for example, The Wizard of Oz, are not. So I think that even if in films that are not explicitly religious, we can find something of value.
Yeah,
I,
no, I agree 100%. Uh, I think the original question to you about why is film powerful or important, right? Today's the Super Bowl, right? Why are people watching it? There's going to be much more people watching the Super Bowl than listening to it on the radio. Why? Why is this the three of us? Why is it nice that people are watching this video now on YouTube? Because they can see our face. Oh, they're real people. They're not bots
Sure.
or whatever. I think film, it's just the medium of delivery is more powerful because it gets you closer to the full experience of having a conversation with someone in a coffee shop or whatever. I think, yeah, Philip was saying before, whether I was trying to be diplomatic or not, I just think the Catholics have this exact same problem. Catholics have the exact same problem with films like that. So many of the Catholic talk shows or whatever are so pathetically cringy and awful. And there's this kind of idea about, I'm going to give you my faith testimony, haha, cheesy jokes, LOL. Oh, like where Alex, your earlier point that I was saying about some of these things mocking someone's story. Some people would be like, I've had a really tough life. This is the bad stuff, and you're coming on here just being like, well, you got to just like, how about just crack open your Bible and you're gonna feel better in 5 minutes, in between your latte and that kind of just disgusting kind of like attitude. And then Catholic films, too, I think in general, have become way, way, way inspired by that Protestant genre of
I
film.
think you're right. Yeah.
Where that's why Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ is so awesome, is because like it's so brutal, it's so just in your face. And Mel Gibson's great, I think, as a filmmaker. His film Apocalypto, I don't know if you guys have seen that, is one of the
I
best
have,
films
yes.
ever. Unbelievable. Some reviewer described it as like a Fast and Furious car chase in the Mayan jungle. And yeah, and there's nothing like it's just completely straight up. What I think that Catholics could do to regain this kind of artistic tradition would be to make films like the original Nosferatu. I haven't seen I haven't seen the new Robert Eggers Nosferatu film. My brother-in-law saw it, and he said it was like ridiculously gratuitously gory and like no thanks. And I'm not into, it's obviously based on, Bram Stoker, Dracula and all that. I'm not into the whole vampire genre. But Nosferatu, I remember being surprised, the original Nosferatu from the 1920s, which was
Mm.
made by people at the time of the Spanish flu, actors like after the First World War and the Spanish flu, was the only horror movie ever put on the Vatican's list of this like most important films. Why is that? Because at the end, like when the girl sacrificed herself, there's almost this idea too the filmmakers left in of some, and I forget this now, but like some facsimile or some like shadow of the rosary and that kind of thing, and people were saying there is a connection between
Oh,
Fatima
wow.
and Nosferatu, that this had happened. Fatima, the apparitions of Fatima in 1917, Nosferatu was in 1921. Some of those filmmakers intentionally were like the response to kind of evil in the flesh, this Nosferatu vampire figure who's like ravaging the city, is the rosary, is to take what Our Lady says seriously. Ernest Hemingway, who is a very bad Catholic by his own admission, said that Fatima convinced me it's all true. And a final film I think that does a good job that's not explicitly that is absolutely not hitting you over the head with religious themes. It's very, very, very religious. Is Gran Torino. I don't know if the two of you have seen that.
I have seen it. Yes.
Clint Eastwood.
That's very Christian. I mean, it's awful. It's blasphemous at times, whatever. But Clint Eastwood, in the end, literally getting gunned down in a hail of gunfire in the cruciform form to save the girl who before he just derided with all his kind of racial epithets her, but he dies for her in this kind of Christ-like act is 1,000 times better than Forgive Me, like The Chosen or whatever. Oh, and Jesus is your buddy or whatever, like that kind of stuff. So I think that like the Catholics need to rediscover the dark chocolate aspect of our faith. Like Catholicism is dark chocolate, bitter, amazing coffee. that's so beautiful. Like why are Catholic churches so much more impressive? Why when you walk into Kościół Mariacki in Kraków, the darkness of that, it's the verticality, why is it so overwhelming? And why is a Payless shoe store church disgusting? I mean, so our film has become Payless shoe store, and we have to make films like Gothic architecture, like dark and
I'm gonna quote that. I'm gonna quote that. No, that's one of my favorite films. It is a religious film, The Passion of Joan of Arc. Completely silent.
I think that's also on the Vatican list.
Yeah, but there's a reason for it. It's I thought it was profound. If you watch it with the full kind of orchestral accompaniment, it's a wonderful film, but it's completely silent. Not sentimental at all. I think sentimentality uh, has to go. I mean, God will give you, he'll give a bit of a tangent. I know we're running out of time, but he'll give you a little bit of sweetness. But most of the time, we're not going to feel that sweetness, right? And that's where we have to kind of keep going and struggle, right? Uh, well, we only have a few minutes, but I did want to read. This kind of fits perfectly with what
Can I
Gracjan
just say a
said.
couple things more before you get into that?
Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. Say that again.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to say a couple things, if that's
Yes,
okay.
yes, please do.
The first thing is when you were talking about Mel Gibson, I was smiling because when you said Mel Gibson is great and you added as a filmmaker, because we have to make sure Mel Gibson's not so great when it comes to race relations.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
um,
and his personal life. I mean, I think that, but you can separate, right? You can
I know,
separate.
I know, I know. I
I
just,
Yeah, no,
I
that's
just,
a good point. You
right.
can separate
Uh,
the individual from the artist, right? How
I
many
know, I know.
artists? Well,
Just like the Renaissance popes, who were not
yeah,
necessarily exemplars of
definitely.
sanctity, they
Well,
sponsored all these great works of art. And I just wanted to say one film that's one of my favorites, and is definitely made by someone who's not a Christian, but at the same time,
is it Napoleon Dynamite?
well, no, I don't like that movie.
That's an inside joke. I don't know if we'll have
Uh,
time to
yeah.
talk about it, but
But it's The Straight Story by David Lynch, who passed away recently. And David Lynch was a really weird guy. His films were filled with bizarre, surreal
yes, you
imagery.
wrote an article about that. Yes,
Yes, I did. I did.
yes.
And So he was definitely not a Christian. He practiced transcendental meditation. But in 1999, he made a movie called The Straight Story, which was distributed by Disney, and it's actually rated G, even though it's not explicitly for children. Um, but it's just one of the most Christian movies I've seen in my life. It's about an elderly man who learns that his brother, whom he hasn't spoken to in many years because they had a fight, just had a stroke and he might die. And so this old man named Alvin Straight, hence the title, decides to travel to see his brother before it's too late to make up with him. The problem is that Alvin Straight doesn't have a driver's license because of some health issues. So he decides to travel several hundred miles from Iowa to Wisconsin on a tractor lawnmower. And that while that might sound silly, it's not a silly movie at all. And it actually does have explicitly Christian imagery in it. Granted, David Lynch did not write the screenplay. Um, and Its themes of forgiveness, of family, why family's important. Uh, it's These are very Christian themes, and it's just one of the most beautiful movies I've seen in my life.
Wow.
And even though it was made by a pagan, I hope that David Lynch isn't upset wherever he is right now, that he's not upset that I called him pagan. But he was definitely not a Christian. He made this very, very Christian movie that's just
Yeah,
beautiful.
he's grappling with something. He's
David
grappling with some deeper issues.
David Foster Wallace, who I mentioned before, and he's come up, many times, here and there or whatever. But as we were, mentioned, in our off-camera conversation just earlier about him, that he failed RCIA twice, and I always kind of mention this in interviews. David Foster Wallace did. So he himself was kind of this God-haunted man. He loved David Lynch. He loved the films of David Lynch. I remember him. I remember him talking, multiple times in various interviews of Lynch being kind of. I think again, I don't want to speak too strong now as well and say that he was like his personal hero. I don't know if that's true, but I think Foster Wallace really looked at Lynch as kind of like the true artiste kind of guy, like that he makes
Wow.
films the right way, and I kind of want to write fiction the way that he makes films.
Wow. Um, I think we're running out of time. But I
You did
just
want to ask something
yes,
before I rudely interrupted, and so I don't feel guilty. Could you just ask that one
By
last
the
question?
way, Alex, and I said to you, yeah, exactly. I think we're like at an hour now or whatever.
we are.
I
Yeah.
I can go like 5, 10 minutes more, whatever. Like, that's cool. Like, it's not like unless anyone has to run, exactly. I'm cool going a little bit over if you guys are.
Okay. If you don't mind, I'm going to read
Yeah.
this one passage from Gratian's book, The Hippo Lectures. This is a wonderful book, by the way. I mean, it's I want all of my books to be known, but especially the two of you, your books, your contributions, your translations. I mean, as you can tell, I get very passionate about these things. This is okay. Sure, this is from the introduction. Sure, we all know the many pitfalls of post-Vatican II Catholicism in America, the ghastly architecture, the thin unspiritual sustenance homilies, the general lack of reverence, dropping mass attendance, widespread rejection of traditional morality. One could go on and on until melting in a puddle of tears. What people don't often point out is that one of the greatest sins of the postmodern era is that what is so incredibly and unbelievably and breathtakingly exciting, the Holy Catholic faith, has been made, or at least many an old college try attempts have been made in this direction, dull and sterile, and worst of all, yeah, again, yeah, see, boring. The faith is not boring. So 27 years as a Catholic, again, this is not about me, but 27 years a Catholic, every year, every moment, every month, I find something more interesting about the faith. It's like an infinite well. It completely fascinating to me, and I think like both of your works, just in general. I mean, you in many ways you've opened up my mind to many different facets of the faith, and yeah, I just can't stress enough. The two of you, the works of both of you, um, and I just congratulate you both on your work and your continued success. Um, and I don't know if the two of you have any concluding thoughts about anything, and then we'll just kind of wrap up from there.
Well, thank you for your very kind words,
You're
and
welcome.
thanks
Yeah,
for inviting me.
you're welcome. And Gratian, I don't know if you have any concluding thoughts
Yeah.
other than just buy your books.
Yeah, exactly. Thought number one, buy my books. Number
Yeah,
two, buy my books. Also buy my books.
yeah,
Yeah, I hope that I think the my concluding thought, my hope would be that everybody in this kind of like next generation of Catholics, and I'm really painting with a large brush. Like I myself am, 37 years old. I'm talking about people that are just getting into the game, kind of doing whatever, Catholic stuff, whatever it is. Some person starts a Catholic podcast, or they're, artists, or so, in their early 20s, through people in their, 50s, 60s, whatever. Kind of anyone who's not either, too young or retired or something. I would hope that just like, Catholics in America, and I especially speak to that in North America, Canada, would, yeah, try to like that dark chocolate aspect of Catholicism. That's my concluding thought. Like, can we please stop the kind of like if things are becoming too fuzzy and kind of like I don't know. And people actually like that though. I guess I have to lament. They asked a famous French writer once, "Are you still a monarchist?" And he's like, "I'm a monarchist, but a monarchist without hope." He's like, "It doesn't matter." So like, I wonder if I'm like a dark chocolate Catholic, dark chocolate Gothic cathedral Catholic, but without hope. It seems people love the Protestant thing, like in terms of like, hey, gang, when everyone comes into church, make sure there's someone there to greet them with a huge smile and let it like, and like I'm a terribly nice person. I'm not saying that as a compliment. What I'm saying is I'm not some kind of like aloof, super serious
sure.
person. So I'm a huge hypocrite if I'm criticizing people for being too nice because I try to be too nice and maybe it's almost like sometimes self-serving. Well, I just want everyone to be, happy and whatever. But yeah, that's my kind of concluding thought. Even if you're going to be that way in real life, and maybe that is nice to have good interpersonal relations, I would like Catholics to do kind of more shocking work, shocking art. And I'm
Sure.
not talking about just basic transgressive stuff.
Right, right.
Yeah, of postmodernity, whose only thing is to shock. I'm talking about like, can we not have the next movie, the next great Catholic movie, be in that kind of cuddly, bubbly with inspirational music? Can it like I want Catholics to like, yeah, that's why Mel Gibson's movies are so good because like you just get so angry by them if in some ways. Like how dare he portray this so realistically kind of thing, like this is people so that's my, it's too long of a concluding thought, forgive me, but like
No,
more dark chocolate.
my great hope, it's probably impossible, is to get this into film. I mean, how is that ever going to happen? Who knows, right? Providence knows.
Someone who's watching the show who's some kind of secret oligarch needs to call Mel Gibson and tell him to what.
Yeah, this book. I think someone made a comment on the YouTube channel, my very modest YouTube channel. I don't know how many people watch it, but hopefully more people will start watching
Yeah,
them.
yeah, sure.
Somebody made a comment that this is like a film in book form or something like that. This is this can easily be made into a film by a very smart but creative, mad genius.
And you know what?
So
Like, obviously, from your lips to God's ears, and I would love that. I have no problem admitting, like, shamelessly, I've said many times before, like, my delusions of grandeur and all that. Like, yeah, I want everyone to read my books for sure. And what writer doesn't? But here's the kind of thought with that. You said it best. It has to be the right person. If the wrong person made the movie and it became super famous, but it became like it completely lost its message, I would hate
sure,
that.
yeah.
I'd rather it never get made than if it got made into a Disneyfied nonsense like, oh, take out all the rough edges, just this really nice story, that kind of crap. I'm
Well,
so
it's going to have to go the independent route then. So, but then you need a lot of money, right? So maybe one day, it'll happen. But with that, I want to thank you for this conversation. I
Thanks
really
for
enjoyed
inviting
it.
me.
Um, Once again, thank you for taking time out of your day, and I you'll have in the description of the video you'll have links to their works. And once again, thank you for this conversation, and we'll talk again. Thank you, everyone.